Brendan Mulligan is joining us, our first guest in a long time on the show. Thanks for being with us, Brendan.
Thank you for having me.
Brendan created Podpage, which is what we actually use for the podcastclub.tv website. And so we wanted to get his input as somebody who provides a service for podcast websites about podcast websites. So, but first, before we get to the interview part, we do a little banter usually at the beginning. We usually do a cold open, but sometimes it's kind of weird where you're having this conversation between me and Adam and Molly, and like the guest is just kind of sitting there not saying things. So I figured I'd introduce Brendan first. But Adam, did you survive Black Friday at the Washington Music Center?
Still here. Showed up, so we're good. There's still some stuff around, so it's all right.
Nobody broke the doors down or anything?
And it's an interesting year this year for Black Friday and sales, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There's not too many sales going on because no one's got anything, so.
Gotcha.
Interesting time.
Adam, I can't hear you at all.
Is this better?
I mean, not really, no.
Can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
But you're
I'm
really
the gear guy,
low, right?
I can't figure any of this shit out. So,
am I really going that deaf, y'all?
Is your volume up, Molly?
Of course my volume is all the way up, man. You want to watch me push this button like my grandmother?
No,
nothing's happening.
Molly and I both have Brendan. Molly and I both have background in music industry, and Molly was probably in front of house and out in the audience, getting her ears blasted off by PAs more than I was. I was on stage running monitors and stuff most of the time.
I blame it on go-go.
Yeah.
I always say I used to be music industry also, and I always say that it took me a few years after leaving to not stand in the back of the room and analyze the set. It took me years to get back to just enjoying and being super present, and with the music as opposed to the performance.
Yeah. What did you do in the music industry?
I started at this small label out of Chicago that had a joint venture with Sony called Aware Records.
Cool.
And it was like back in 2000s, we managed a bunch of singer-songwriters, or we signed a bunch of singer-songwriters, and then we turned some of it into a management company. And so, but I mean, I went on a tour with bands. We did a arena tour with John Mayer when he was dating Jessica Simpson. So we did and then immediately after I got in this tiny van and did like a Southeast, like tiny club. So I've done the whole touring thing. I worked for CAA as an intern in college. So I did a lot of
Creative Artist Agency, which is a booking agent, big, massive booking agency.
Yeah. And then I left that to build technology for musicians, and that sort of led me to do what I'm doing now. So,
are you a musician yourself? Do you play any instruments?
In high school, I played some guitar and drums, but I sort of left that behind years ago.
What was the technology that you built for musicians?
So this is mid 2000s. So MySpace and those kind of sites were being built, and so we'd get like, it was always great at our label that you would get like, oh my god, we just got booked on a bunch of dates, 20 dates, great. Part of my job and other people at the company's job was then to copy and paste those dates in like 50 different places, and then it'd be like, oh, this set time changed or this venue changed, and you had to go back and like. Again, it was MySpace and the 50 MySpace clones. It was sending it out to the management team. It was putting it in the tour book. And so the first thing I built was basically it was called Artist Data with these very creative names that I come up with products. And it was literally like a syndication thing. So if you were going to, let's say you're playing a show in DC at the 930 Club, you'd go into my dashboard, you'd put 930 Club in, and it would be posted on your MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, 50 other sites. It'd be sent to, I forget what the local paper in DC is, but it would send it to all the local papers.
Wow.
It just did, and it put a widget on the website. So it was cool.
That's huge. Especially back then.
Yeah. It's awesome.
that was back in those days, we were still using print tour books. Like this was pre-smartphone and all that stuff. So
and the tool built those. Like you could print out a tour book with all the little, it was a half sheet. Yeah. And it had, What
were you going to say, Molly?
Well, that's back when we were all learning HTML to decorate our MySpace pages too. That's where we all became coders, low key.
Well, it's funny, and not to jump the conversation forward, but we can go back to it. The transition was MySpace fell apart.
Yes,
musicians' fan bases, which they'd spent millions of dollars building on MySpace, fell apart.
Yeah,
I started echoing at these music industry conferences, like you need a website. Musicians would be like, "That's great. I don't know how to build one." Because you need to get people on your mailing list. So I ended up building a platform for musicians to build websites. Which
What was that called?
that was called One Sheet. That had a better name.
Yeah, I remember One Sheet.
Yeah,
You built
Yeah,
that?
me
That's
too.
awesome.
yeah.
I had a lot of friends that used One Sheet.
Yeah, that was it's funny when we get into the business talk. That was a great product, horrible business. And then, it was actually seeing podcasters. I was searching for some podcasts a couple years ago, and I was like, you guys don't have websites? You're relying on these distribution channels for all of your,
Yeah.
it's like, and so that's kind of what I built Podpage for a friend, because I was like, you got to have a website. I mean, and the data is there. I can spin up a website for you. So
Right.
kind of started as a weekend hack project and has developed over time. But it solves the same problem that I was solving 10 years ago for musicians, which is just like direct connection to your audience and not relying on Apple and Google and Spotify is the only way.
And that's something I definitely want to talk about later, how the problems that podcasters face with growing their audience is not unique to podcasting. But first, I wanted to springboard off of what you were saying and how you got into building Podpage, this valuable tool that I know a lot of podcasters are starting to use now. Like you said, it started off from your music background, but how did you decide to, were you a podcast fan? Or did,
I'm a fan and have a couple friends with podcasts.
Okay.
But no, I mean, it wasn't an overly complex decision. It was, I never really understood. I never dug into how podcasting was syndicated. So
okay.
In music, when you want to put your music on Spotify, you go through a distribution service, ideally one called DistroKid, which is my favorite.
DistroKid.
And you give them the files, and their job is like FedEx to take the files and give them to Apple, and then Apple serves the files.
Yep.
Podcasting, I didn't realize until 2 years ago, it's just an RSS feed, which blew my mind. And I was like, wait, so all of the data that they get is just available for anyone. And so that was like just a kind of and then when my buddy didn't have a website, I was like, I think I could probably just build you one. Like, I don't need to build a database. I just need to build a front end that reads the feed and puts the data on a website.
Yeah.
And because it's structured, we can do all kinds of great SEO work and make it search engine optimized, and Google can find it. And I don't have to get anyone to enter data when you're building a product. And if you have to ask someone to come onto your dashboard and enter a bunch of data, that was what Artist Data's biggest issue was, hey, come use this database. And they're like, well, the first thing you have to do is sit down for 3 hours and type in a bunch of information. It's really hard to get people to do that.
Yeah.
You mean working with artists was difficult? That's shocking.
That's a whole,
in front of computers? Man, no way.
Working with artists was slightly less difficult than getting them to pay for anything. But,
yes. Amen.
I'm laughing because it's just trauma. That's how I process trauma from working with artists for 20 years.
It's what I do for a living.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it sounds like you can actually trade them physical goods that they need to do their job. Where
it's a little more straightforward.
Yeah. A lot of the tools that I built for them saved them time, which wasn't necessarily their biggest issue. But anyway, that was the podcasting thing. It was just like, holy shit, this can just appear. And that's still how Podpage works. You enter your podcast name, you click see my website, and I show you 15 different versions of a fully built out website with all of your episodes, all of your episode players, regardless of what your host is. It's just, it's still delightful for me I built a ton of these websites for people or have helped them go through it. And it's like, every time I'm like, oh, that's cool. Look at all that stuff. It's just right there.
It's really good. Our page is super clean, super professional. Looks really good. Yeah, really well built.
I also love how, though, you're just pulling the information in, but then we can do whatever we want to after it. Because there are a lot of other services that kind of aggregate the RSS feed and make it look nice, which is essentially what a lot of these host services are doing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very limiting as to what you can include, and you allow us to put whatever we want to essentially in the episode notes on the actual website when we actually take time to do it.
The nice is that you can choose to do it if you want to.
Yeah. And then the video too, which this is a video podcast. So being able to put that on there, which obviously is an upsell feature for you, but it automatically sucks in, or we just put the YouTube URL in there and it appears right at the top of the page along with the audio player, which is awesome.
Yeah. It just is if you can make it, and the other piece is it's not just a one-time import. We check the RSS feed on an hourly basis, sometimes every 10 or 15 minutes. And so there are a lot of people who set up one of these pages and then never come back again, right? They're just like, cool, I don't have to worry about the website. Like, we'll automatically tweet and send and post to Facebook if you want. Like, it's just sort of that part of it is over. I mean, I've always believed when I was working with musicians, my whole thesis was take every pain point away outside of songwriting or performing. Right? Like, no musician should be spending their time, managing a website or writing a tour book, right? And yes, when you're bigger, you have teams for that, but when you're smaller, you have to do it all yourself. So, and with podcasters, it's like, spend time like researching whoever you're going to interview, getting guests, writing great content, doing whatever, but don't spend time social media. I mean, you need to do it, but it's just a shame that you have to do it. So the more we can take off the plate.
That's how I feel about the production of it too. I think so many, there's yet another app about to roll out and they're like, oh, you can edit inside the app. And it's like, we're taking away all these jobs from the AV industry every time we're like, you can record from your phone and the whole world will listen to it. Like, no, they won't. The only person who can get away with that is Russell Brunson because he's already a gabillionaire with like a gabillion followers, right? He's probably in his bathroom on his phone, not caring at all if anybody listens to it. He's the only person that can record a podcast from his phone. Everyone else needs to like edit it. And they get so caught in getting it for free or learning how to edit and spending 8 hours. And then it just sounds worse than when they started. And they're not spending enough time on the strategy and the amplification, like what happens before and afterwards. So it's the same thing. It's like, why are you spending 10 hours an episode on something that a professional would have spent 40 minutes on? Like, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And on some level, like when you're starting early, for sure, there's budget issues and all that. But at the end of the day, your time has value too. So, and if you're going to spend all your time on like the nuances of the website or the editing, and then you got no steam left to tell anybody, it doesn't matter if it sounds like NPR produced it. Nobody knows about it. So it doesn't matter. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, creating these tools to make it easier for people to focus on the content and not get so overwhelmed with the, it's like making a to-do list and only doing the really simple stuff, you know what I mean? And then you're still somehow wasted a whole day and you're not any closer.
Yeah. I feel like this happens, some of the so you don't have to have an RSS to launch a Podpage website. You can build it manually. It's not a delightful experience like the other one is, but it's possible, right? Because you have to enter everything in yourself. And but so a lot of these people like come in and they get themselves in this like getting started state. And when I connect with them, I'm like, oh, so when are you launching? They're like, I need to get this mic and I need to work a little bit more because I want to get this like $600 mic or this $400, something, because I saw online that this is the best mic. And there's so much that goes into like building the perfect studio and there's so much prep work. And then they never launch the thing instead of just being like, my first few episodes are going to sound like crap. But if the content is good, everything else will be fine. But they spend so much time worried about all the other stuff that, I just think it like overthinking it in general. Same with the website. People come in, they're like, oh, this is cool, but I want to customize these 50 different things. And I'm like, go use WordPress.
Right.
You're going to spend, it might be better for what you want, but like, that's not what I'm for. I'm for making this not part of your day.
Yeah. But you do offer a surprising amount of features that you can adjust. Like that was, because I'm used to these template systems that are super, super limited. And, you offer fonts and colors and all this stuff that's actually, you can actually go pretty far with it.
Yeah, I think, I look at it and I see all the warts and I see like a bloated piece of software that needs to be simplified and all that. But yeah, you're right. I think that the biggest missing piece for it today is sort of the ability to kind of go in and like click and move stuff around. That's something that you get on Squarespace and you get on Google Sites, and it's just we haven't gotten there yet. We've spent more time like building the features about like pulling in your reviews from iTunes or Apple Podcasts and like connecting with Podchaser and all the very podcast, building a voicemail feature. Like that's where we've invested time to build, as opposed to like kind of the boilerplate web developer move things around features. But we'll get there.
Do you get a lot of people asking for that?
They don't specifically ask for that, but they say like, hey, on my homepage, I want to have my hosts at the top of the page, not the bottom.
Oh, gotcha.
And, the way the code works is just like you go down the page. There's like, if you have hosts, they show up here, as opposed to being able to like slide them to the top. Or like my tabs on the top of the page or my navigation bar, I want a about listed second, not first, or wanting to move stuff around. So it's those kind of small customizations that is kind of all the same solution solves all of the problems.
Gotcha.
It's just
it's a huge undertaking.
It's drastically different.
Yeah.
And so, and my worry is that if we go that direction, that people who find it simple will no longer find it simple. So that's always the problem.
Totally.
So.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because what's going to really bring more value, right? Like at the end of the day, you're selling it this way because it looks the best this way, and based on the research and the data that you have, right? And like moving that tab in one direction isn't going to make a big difference, but having the reviews available or connecting with other software could be really helpful. So I think those are better, updates to focus on. Because at the end of the day, that's just analysis paralysis showing its head in another way. Like, I really want this tab over here. Like, shut up, man. Just release broadcast. Stop playing. Nobody gives a shit about your tabs, bro.
And I've held the line for about 2 years now. And like I said, it started as a friend wants a website. I created a website. It had a landing page with a list of episodes, and it had a page for every episode. That was it. I think he was using Simplecast at the time, and his website was on Simplecast. And I think it wasn't much more than they gave you, but it had like an SEO optimized version of it with landing pages for every episode and reviews. I think that was it. And since then, it's really been just like everything has been built because podcasters asked for it. I'm not a podcaster, so I don't know what to build next. So it's the community has shaped this product. And I think we are at the stage where the majority of the requests do end up in that additional customization because we've already built reviews and podcasts and importing videos and posting to Twitter and, tying in Buy Me a Coffee or all the different, monetization sites. Like there's so much that's been added. So it feels like all of those features that I always like, I'll do this later. Sort of now they've come back and they're kind of at the top of the list of like, yep, this now will solve most people have. So we'll see. If we can do it simply, then I'd like to do it. But
so Brendan,
how big is your team?
Oh, sorry.
There's about 6 people who work on the product in either design, development, or support. And so I work across all 3. I built most of it, but do have a team that a couple people that help at this point. Support, I try to do as much support as I possibly can because there's no better way to like develop a product than just talking to the customers all day, every day. So, and luckily the support isn't heavy because it's a pretty simple product to use. And so I try to do as much support as possible, and then all the design work. So.
Right on. So what is the best way to leverage a pod page with a WordPress? Like all 3 of us have websites, that we'd like to feature the podcast on. So like I'm building, blog posts for each one, but the pod page looks way, way better. Is there a way to embed the pod page, or is it only a redirect at this point?
Yeah. I've been saying that there isn't a way to embed it so many times to like on in the conversations. I'm just waiting for someone to come and be like, yes, there is. You just don't know about it. Because I would say the biggest feature request, and I put that in quotes because it's sort of a not possible, is to have like, brendanspage.com/podcast, and the pod page is like at the /podcast, but the rest is a WordPress site. From my understanding, there's about like 10 reasons why that's just not technically possible. Mostly because of the way that domains work and point. I did find one like super highly technical way that maybe you could potentially do it in a way that might work, but the amount of like technical setup that each person would have to do is just, it wouldn't make any sense. So what I usually recommend people is if you really, really want it at your website, on your website, I know like Blueberry and Captivate have some WordPress plugins that they can automatically create podcast pages, or, and I've heard they're great if you love your WordPress site. The other thing you can do is you can have it hosted at, like if you were at molly.com, it would be podcast.molly.com. If you went to podcast.molly.com, that's full pod page, and works like, totally. It's, and you can sort of theme it to be the same, but it is a separate site because essentially like www.molly.com points to this WordPress server, podcast.molly points to pod page, and everything works perfectly. It's tough. That's the best solution if you really want if you really want the full pod page experience.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's a little easier if we were only doing episodes. We could maybe do a plugin that just put episode pages on. But like, because we have review pages, episode pages, video pages, we have a full blog feature. We have you can do custom pages. We've got privacy policies, guest registration forms. Like, it's such a product that it can't really just kind of squeeze into the WordPress site. But if anyone's listening who knows how to do that,
that's right. If you're
we would
out
probably
there,
double our user base because people really want that.
Well, I guess the best way to kind of circumvent that would be to create blog posts on your website, on your own like company website for the podcast, and then at the bottom of each like episode blog post, put like, for more episodes, click here, and then send it to the pod page. And that way you're still, like, if you're writing a blog post for that podcast episode, you could put that link on LinkedIn, drive people to your website, and then if they want more, then click to pod page. And then they can really see everything from that point. Maybe that's the best way, especially, there's 3 of us, right? We have 3 different websites. Or places we'd like to post this stuff. So
that's what I plan on doing exactly, Molly, but I just haven't done it yet because it takes effort in addition to, because that's the whole point of Brendan creating this platform is like, it just, you publish the podcast episode via your host and then it just shows up on a website that you can link to. But our case is unique because there are 3 of us pointing to each of our own websites and we're using this as content to drive people for our content marketing.
It's kind of interesting to think about, like the just sort of ideating, but having a plugin for WordPress that all it does is create a WordPress post that has like a snippet about the episode, but just redirects to the pod page.
That's a great idea.
And like that, it can be automated or something like that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. A lot of times, like usually what I ask people is, do you want the podcast itself to be its own brand, right? Is it, if it was my podcast, would like if I had a brand around my name, would I want the podcast to be about me, or would I want to do like a podcast about, beekeeping? And what I really cared about was like keywords, beekeeping, and being like, and having that be its own brand. And a lot of times people naturally just want to put it on their website. But if it's a strong brand, sometimes it should live on its own, basically. If people are going to be searching for beekeeping versus my name, it'd be better for it to just be on its own page. So it kind of depends on, it depends on what people are doing. A lot of corporations, corporate podcasts that are really meant to just drive leads so they can sell whatever they're selling are better off on their own website, but kind of depends.
That's a good distinction to make for sure.
About how to connect it to the site?
Yeah, like how would we, in your ideal scenario, how would this podcast serve your business?
Well, in my world, I don't want anyone to ever leave my site.
Right.
So, so having them have to go to a different page is less advertising. It's more about getting them back to my page. So, you can be creative with descriptions and stuff like that about where you leave, breadcrumbs to get them back. But I often think about if I'm thinking about driving traffic to my site, because it's retail, because that's the end game for me. It's not necessarily the listens, it's part of it, but that's my end game, right? How they navigate from one to the next and then get back would be where I'd have to think about how, and it's just going to have to come from leaving buttons or notes or blogs or that sort of thing.
Yeah. We have, I think it's called Tiny Capital. They have a podcast and they went to the trouble. So I let you put all kinds of CSS and custom code in if you really want to do that. And what they did is they basically made the top part of their podcast look almost identical to the top part of their website, including their logo. So on Podpage, if you click their logo, it just goes to the homepage of their website. Smart. And they have the same navigation links on both Podpage and their website. So as a user, unless you look at the URL and you notice you're going from www to podcast. You don't feel like you're actually leaving or going to a website. You're just sort of...
That's a sensei level move right there.
That is.
That's sneaky.
It's a lot of work too.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is
not if you got a full-time web developer on staff.
That's true. You got one of those, Adam?
I do. So does Adam.
What's been the most interesting like addition or change to like from where you started to where you ended up with Podpage? Like what's been like the most requested, or what was like one addition you made to the platform that was like, I did it. Like these guys are going to love this.
So, well, it's so many different questions in that question, because one is the assumption that I know what will be good, and then like, is the best thing that I added something that I even knew was going to be good. And so I think that probably the one that landed the most, the one that was probably the most requested was like, I want to import all my YouTube videos. Like I have a YouTube channel. I want that to come in. Like users ask for that all the time. I think that's probably and we added that, and sure, there was enthusiasm, but it wasn't like, oh my God, game changed. It was just like, all right, thanks for adding it. It just wasn't, it didn't have the sort of explosive impact.
When was that happening? When was that like request? Because you're very central to the whole podcast world. Like, you know, you see it from a different vantage point than we three do, you know? Mm-hmm. So like everybody uses your service for a different purpose, or they come to you for a different reason. And you're like, I get asked certain questions. I see what people buy. I see what they, you know, Marcus sees what they, you know, who values his services. Like, it's interesting to see like what trends you're seeing and what waves you're seeing made in the industry.
That started getting a lot louder, you know, during COVID, when everyone stopped meeting up in public to do their interviews, and it was all being recorded anyway. And they're like, well, shit, why don't I just put this on my website, because I'm doing. But that was like a heavily requested feature that, you know, it did well. I mean, it does, people use it, but I don't feel like there's no like, oh, when we added that, our business changed. Right, it was just like a new feature. The one that totally unexpected was, so I was just, you know, I try to structure the data that you're entering in. Like if you're on Squarespace, you like create a post, and then you have to like structure it however, like basically you're just creating a blog post. Where on Podpage, you create, like each episode, you can assign a guest, and a guest is saved in the database as a guest, and you can build a guest profile. And so you can say, oh, Brendan was on the podcast club, and you can put my photo underneath it. And when you click on my name, we have automatically created a page for me on your website that has a list of all the episodes I've been on, right? So there's just some structure to the data. So I released that because it seemed like the obvious, of course, this is good structured data for podcasts. And it was good. People liked it. But someone was like, is there a way I could have my guest fill this out? Because you have to put like a name, biography, photo. And we have a pretty active Facebook group. And a couple people sort of made that suggestion. And I was like, actually, technically, that's one of the easiest things I could have done, because I already built the entire data model. I just needed to have a form that would be publicly accessible. And so it was a pretty straightforward project, and released it. And it was just, people still go crazy over it.
Really?
Because it was this huge, no one really thought to articulate the pain point, but everyone who does an interview, usually, you know, a lot of people, they have to go like get the guest bio, get the guest photo, get the guests, have them sign a release. Like there's all these steps that you either do them all or you ignore them all, or, you know, generally, like I get, every time I do one of these, I usually like, hey, can you send your bio, your photo? And then they have to take that. So by making that public, I also did like a small thing where you could upload your own release, podcaster release, or we have a stock one for you if you don't want. If you don't have your own. But like suddenly these people are like, oh, I can just send this to all my guests. And so not only was it being used for future guests, but people were starting to email all of their old guests being like, hey, can you please fill out your bio on my website so I can have it? Like, I don't know. I wouldn't say I think we haven't marketed it as well as we could, but like people, when they find that feature, they're sort of floored by it.
Have you ever noticed, or can you even access the data to see how much it's actually used? Because that, to me, that functionality, while it's really cool, me as a producer, especially with the clientele that I'm working with, and Molly too, like some of your clients, I would never ask them to go, here, click this URL and fill in your bio and upload your picture, because I'm dealing with like Steph Curry and, you know, all these celebrities and stuff. And honestly, I would, like, even for this show, you know, I would never ask you to do that because you're already taking the time to be on my show. But there are a lot of podcasters out there that are just thinking about their own process, like what we were getting at earlier. They're trying to streamline to save them time so they can focus more on their show. And I totally understand it. Yeah. But, you know, it'd just be interesting to see the data on whether or not it's actually being used.
It's used. Well, it's used pretty heavily, and I think it's used by the people who primarily already were sending out an email saying, "Could you please send me this information? Mm-hmm. Could you please fill out this Google form? Whatever everyone's doing. Could you please send me back a PDF with this release signed, right?
Right.
There's people who do that and there's people who don't. This, for the people who do it, was mind blowing, right? There's a Calendly integration so they can then book themselves on the show. Like,
Cool.
and also people are using it. I built it as sort of a hidden URL that you had to get access to. You couldn't just, like you would never want this form to be public. And the biggest feature request was like, I want this form to be public. I want this to be an application to be a guest on my show, not like a registration form. Anyway, it's just like to answer the question, Adam's question, like that was one of those features that I think seeing the community react to that was crazy because it didn't seem like, it was way harder to build the YouTube thing. Like 50 times harder to build the YouTube thing. And that was, people like it. But this one, people kind of, it's like, and also, as a selfishly, like when they use it, it promotes Podpage.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
And that wasn't the intention, but anyway, so.
Yeah, we use, we used to have this link to Calendly. So I did ask people to upload their bio and their picture previously. We just didn't send you that link because I'm all for that. And we ask all of our clients whenever they book, they have to fill out a form that has the guest, their handle, their title, the point of contact for the show, their phone number, their email. And the reason why is because, like, if we're going to be tagging them on social, like, how many, like, middle-aged white dude named Steve Miller there are on LinkedIn? Like, I'm not getting paid for all that, man. I'm not sifting through the million Becky Smiths to find the one that was on your show. Like, no. So the more information we get from people up front, the easier it is. And it just prevents us from having to contact them later. And it also makes sure that we can meet our 5-day guarantee of if you record on Mondays, we get it back on Mondays. And if you don't send us the guest name until Wednesday, well, guess what? Your shit ain't coming out on Monday. So for us, it just keeps that customer expectation. So I'm not at all surprised that people love it because I'm just glad to know people are using those systems because it's all about automations. I love automations like that. Yeah. And it is smart. It is boosting your business. I love that. I think it's... because then people are going to want to build their profiles like IMBD. They're going to be like, oh, you should see my page on Podpage. I'm on 17 different podcasts, right? Does it link that way?
No, well, because all it's doing is like for the podcast club, it's you have your guests' profiles. And so I get a guest. So, I would be on your page, but it's not like Podchaser, which is like linking all these things together because it's not supposed to be a Podpage thing. It's supposed to be just helping. But, where it would be helpful, though, is like if I'm commonly a guest and I'm getting sent the same form by everyone, it'd be a lot easier if I could just save my information and then just register.
What about just getting so many pod products? Not your pod page. What was the other one you just mentioned? Podchaser. Yes, yeah. Podchaser. What about using their APIs and you can have a guest enter their Podchaser URL and it automatically sucks that information. They don't have to fill anything out.
Yeah,
I think competition, man. You don't want other people to know about other podcasts.
Yeah. Solving problems one at a time. Adam, I can't hear you at all, man. I'm probably speaking
your podcast. Not
gay?
Not his podcast or her podcast. My guest. That's really interesting, though.
Yeah.
Is there like another wave of things that you're seeing now? Is it changing now that people are kind of like going? Okay, you've kind of gone through the video evolution, and that's probably here to stay for a while. People are like about it. It's it's good to have that. Do you see any new trends coming as we return to normalcy, not normalcy? I don't know. Like I see trends like everyone and their sister and brother and mother had to have a USB microphone the second the world shut down and the camera. And if you had it and it connected to your computer, it sold instantly, and then it stopped. And then it stopped abruptly. Mm-hmm. And then people cared about the mixers again and going back to having people in a room and making a podcast. And that's kind of waned, or they gravitate towards one thing and not another thing. And I kind of see what the consumer behavior is like as it's kind of evolved. Cameras are not the requirement anymore for everybody. It just depends on how you create and how you're doing it. Is there anything new that you've seen in the last 4 or 5 months that's kind of shifted?
I'm seeing more people. So kind of going back to earlier, I'm seeing more people start the exploration into the audio format on something like Twitter Spaces. as opposed to trying to go super professional at the beginning, just to be like, all right, are there people who want to listen to what I talk about? And so I'll just launch it. You just hit launch a space and you're up. You don't even have to drive people to Clubhouse anymore. You just do it where you already have an audience. So I've seen a lot more people sort of experiment there. It's kind of coming back, I talked to a bunch of the podcast hosts about this, and I feel like we all saw the same thing. Last year, COVID, everyone wanted to start a podcast because what else was there to do? This summer, I feel like there was a huge lull in you saw a lot of podcasts fading. You saw, I hate losing customers. I'm happy that when I lose customers, I think it's like over 90% of the time, because I ask if you want to cancel your account, why are you canceling it? It's 90% of the time, it's just I'm canceling my podcast. And a lot of it, if you look at the podcast, it started about a year ago.
Interesting.
And so people who are like, yeah, this will be fun. And then they're like, actually, there's a bunch of other stuff I like to do. And I don't have time to do this because it's a lot of work. So that's coming back a little bit, but I feel like there's definitely like a lull. So I think those are the two. I think there are more people convinced now that the websites are important. I mean, I think one of my biggest, there's a lot of people pushing back, and I did the same thing in the music industry when people were like, no, I'm on Facebook or I'm on MySpace. I don't need a website. I think people are getting it a little bit more now. And I think Spotify I wouldn't say scared. The Spotify stuff that's happened over the past year has been interesting to see how different people react to it. Suddenly, podcasting is seen as this open, non-walled garden. And yes, you're on these other people's platforms, but still, your content is everywhere. And then sort of the Supercasts and Patreons came out and said, "Oh, do a private feed to make additional capital or to make extra." And that was kind of an interesting thing to explore. I haven't seen that pick up too much. And then the whole Spotify, now you can gate just inside Spotify. And people's reaction to that has been interesting. But it's just kind of the new dynamic. I think, these creators are creating content, and it's very hard just to monetize that content when the content is being blasted out for free on all these different platforms. But you want to keep it open, but you also want to figure out how to make a business out of it. And
and that leads to something that I definitely wanted to talk with you that actually I had a great engagement with a bunch of people on Twitter with this past week. But when we not first engaged, but we had a recent engagement a couple months ago, thanks to Esprit Devora, who has one of the coolest names ever on Twitter. Yeah. And she had asked me what my thoughts about SEO and websites and stuff. And I said, yeah, we're using, Podpage for our podcast.tv. I'll keep you posted on, how the SEO works with that and all that sort of thing. But the more recent discussion was about this buzzword discoverability, and it has to do a lot with what you're talking about with all these apps. And I feel like there's this contingency of people that feel like it's the app's job to help podcasters be discovered. And I think that is complete bullshit. I do not think that is a realistic way to live. Obviously, the apps need to make their apps better so that people can stay in their apps. But for me, as a podcaster, as a content creator, same thing as a musician. This same group of people seems to think that the music industry and the book industry have it so easy because Amazon's algorithm helps people buy books, and Apple Music's algorithm and Spotify's algorithm helps them discover new artists all the time, and they have it so easy. But podcasters are like this, redheaded stepchild. Sorry, Molly.
Hey, how do you know I'm a stepchild?
Are you? No, sorry, redheaded. You're redheaded, but this is not new. This is the discoverability, and so my wife, similar to you, started out in the music industry, similar to me too. Started out in the music industry. She was doing publicity for musicians, and she switched pretty quick to authors because, like you said, musicians don't want to pay. And it's with authors too, it's the same thing. And it all revolves around having your own platform, building your own platform. In my experience, and this is what I was arguing on there, that if you create great content and if you use social media to connect with people and then drive them to your website to then sign up for your newsletter. That's the strategy that we've learned that works best. My wife is the marketing expert, not me. I'm the content producer guy, but that's what I've learned from her. So that's what I wanted to get your take on, especially as a person who's seen this in music, but also is providing this service for podcasters. If like what your take is on the whole discoverability thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have found some great artists because Spotify knows what I like and they serve up new artists that I wouldn't know about. Mm-hmm. I am not in the music industry anymore. And so I don't know exactly if that's literally Spotify's algorithm or if it's Sony Music giving Spotify $100,000 to make sure that artist gets pushed into my feed. Right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to say that it's definitely that, but that seems a lot more what I'm used to when I was in the music industry, right? Music industry, I went through the whole pay to play, like when radios kind of got caught for basically just taking money to play songs. Yeah. I don't, that money just being funneled in different ways, the same, to do the same thing. I'm guessing. Maybe Spotify is someone sitting there being like, let's get the indie artists attention. But still, I think like discoverability still.
Spotify playlists, that's the hustle now. And so it's not even coming from Spotify. It's coming from people creating playlists. And then artists pay big money to get on those playlists. And then those get played in retail shops or whatever because they're popular and they're trending. So it's not even like Spotify who's making the money. It's like influencer playlist creators.
Right.
Yeah.
Blech.
So
yeah.
What I'll say is that but it's still great. I still get to discover stuff. I think it's a lot easier to serve me up a 2.5 to 4.5 minute audio file as a song and for me to listen to it and discover it than it is to be like, here's a 60-minute conversation from some
recorded on an iPhone.
Yeah, from people who you've never heard of before. You should listen to it because we think you'd like it. Like it's a different sell. Anyway, and I also think, so there's that. I also think like the discoverability, it's sort of like when people say like, well, I launched a website. Why isn't Google driving traffic to it? Like the expectation that some other company is just going to bring you all the people.
Right.
And you don't have to do anything, I think is silly. I do think hopefully with both SEO and Google and on some of these podcasting apps, if you do a good job, create good content, start building a momentum, hopefully algorithms kick in to then amplify the momentum.
Exactly.
But you got to start somewhere. So I don't know. That's my sort of, I try to stay up, like people launch websites and I say, listen, we're going to do everything we can to optimize this for SEO. We'll give you tips on how you can go continue to optimize it that's outside of our hands. We will submit it to Google, but you should also submit it to Google. We will do what we can, but we are not going to help promote you or bring you a single person.
Right.
That's not our job.
Right.
I mean, I think at the core, and this is what I always told myself when I was working with so many artists, in order to be a good artist, you have to be a bit narcissistic and you have to have some unrealistic expectations. Otherwise, you wouldn't think that the whole world's going to love you and that you're great at what you do, right? And some of them are and some of them aren't. But they all got to believe they are on some level. And so I just sort of chalk it up to that. You know what I mean? It's just like, and podcasters, I mean, we live in a narcissistic era of like all this conditioning and all this consumerism and this like, I want to film myself and put dog ears and like, and podcasting is just like an extension of that until people realize how much work it is and then nobody showed up. And so that's why like, we went from having pod fade to pod flash. Like, I don't know what's next. Like just I think there's like, you don't even say pod. It's like, they didn't even launch. They did a 2-minute pilot and they were never seen again, and I think that's just sort of a greater, well, it's a bigger thing, right? It's just like the inexperience and narcissism combined. And then a lot of creatives just aren't good at marketing, I mean, for a lot of different reasons, well-intended be that, but, marketing is a whole different thing. I mean, just like, I don't do my taxes either or my oil changes. Like I hire other people to do that stuff because it's a job. It's like editing audio. My video editor doesn't edit audio and my audio editor doesn't really do a great job. I love you, man. But he's not a video editor. Like he can edit in like Rush, but he's not opening Final Cut Pro or whatever. You know what I mean? That's what the video editor does, right? Like, so the biggest problem with podcasting is you're kind of expected to do all. You got to design the graphics. You got to understand technology to set up an RSS feed. You have to record yourself. You have to edit yourself. You have to get people to talk to you. Make sure you hit record. And then when all that's done, you still got 10 hours of work to do. So it's just, I think it's just inexperience. But that's when, talking with clients are like, is this just a noisy market? And I'm like, well, yeah, if you look at how many RSS feeds there are, but how many have released an episode in the last 6 weeks, right? It's suddenly a much, much smaller pond of people.
But
you're not just competing might help. It might help.
Yeah.
Maybe people investing in a year's worth of Podpage is a little accountability. Like at this point, I'm kind of only going to sell monthly services because this whole I'm going to do a podcast every 4 3/4 weeks is not doing it, Susan, wherever you are. So it's like I want to set people up for success, and force them into it. So maybe Podpage will lengthen, maybe it'll be pod slow roll, you know what I mean? Instead of pod fade, and it'll be like pod year. Like I had a pod year.
I will say I wrote a kind of more to get myself to stop building musician tools. I wrote a blog post 5 years ago or 6, maybe 8 years ago, that I forget the title was. It was something like "You should never build a tool for musicians" or something like that. And sort of the issue that I had, and I will say this is not how I felt the podcasting space is, which is one of the things I love about it. Is I felt like when I was building for musicians around discovery, when it came to discoverability, if like for One Sheet, which was websites, if they did well and their career was taking off, they generally would be like, thanks for One Sheet, but like it didn't help me. I helped me. It was my music it's all me. If their career didn't take off, it was like the website didn't no one found me because your website's horrible, right? It was always the service. It was the service's fault if it was not going well. It was the artist's fault if it was going well. And there was a service that helped artists sell merch, and they would like make a big bet on artists at the very beginning, and they took 10-15% of the cut. And it was amazing software, and it didn't really work out because what they found was the more famous the artist would get, they would come back and negotiate lower and lower rates with them.
Yeah.
To the point where basically like, and the artist would say like, you're lucky to sell my t-shirts. I'll give you like 2% or whatever's going to cover your bare minimum cost. So they could never really, they were either getting a big percentage of very small sales or a tiny percentage off big sales. They could never build like a sustainable business off of it.
I feel like you just summarized the music industry.
Yes.
In total.
Yeah.
We're done here, people.
Did you guys ever hear about the 360 deals that were going on with so the 360 deals were where the record label wanted to be your manager. They wanted to own your merch. They wanted to basically have their hands in all your pies and take a piece of everything you made. Whereas like in the past, like in the 90s and early 2000s, merch is like the only place that artists would actually make money on tours. And so anyway,
still kind of that way, honestly.
All right. And this whole people will be pissed about this, but I actually, in this particular case, when they were doing that, I kind of agreed with it in a lot of ways because, and I know that's controversial because record labels are the worst and we should hate them for everything. But like you take one of the artists that we signed early was John Mayer, and he would go off on tour. Sony /Aware/Columbia would pay what was called tour support, which was basically us. I mean, we obviously paid for the record to be recorded, and then every time a CD was sold, we would get a percentage of that, right? And we owned the masters along. I forget what all the deal was, but we also paid tour support. So I forget it was an enormous amount that would pay for the tour bus, that would pay for the crew, it would pay for everything. And
up front.
Up front. And the record label's reason we did that was because it would sell more CDs. But as you can imagine, as iTunes and stuff came in, very quickly that flipped and no one was buying CDs anymore.
Right.
But he was making a fortune every night off of his touring, both in merch and in ticket sales. His management company, who did not front any money for anything, made 15 to 20% off of all of it.
Right.
And so it was because the record, and the reason 360 deals came along is the record label was still operating off of this model where the main revenue would be these albums. And so it was worth them it was dumb how much money we were spending on non-record sales related things. And then once record sales were no longer how artists made their money, this record labels were still footing the bill for all the stuff, but weren't getting anything in return. So that's where those deals came from. I actually think the way they were rolled out was poorly done, but theoretically it makes more sense for all that stuff because what Aware Records ended up doing was we stopped signing artists to the label and we launched a management company because we were like, wow, we basically helped John Mayer go from college dorm rooms to arenas, and his management company made a fortune, and we made less money than most people would think.
Right. Right.
So anyway.
Especially because it hit right when iTunes and streaming and downloads and stuff took off. Because that's the thing that people don't realize is that like the music industry model that was based around selling a plastic disc was a huge moneymaker. And there's so many of my friends that are still so angry at Apple and iPods. How dare they provide this method for people to listen to whatever they want to whenever they want? They need to go to the store and pay $18 to buy the whole disc for one song that they actually want to hear. And it's like that's not a sustainable business model.
Well, and also, I mean, we've now entered into a totally different episode of this podcast. But I will just end with like the music industry has crazy revenue splits, whether it's a recording of a song or the performance of the song, all that. And like songwriters, which are the heartbeat of especially country music, but a lot of pop music, they really were also depending. They got money when songs. They don't really get money. At least last when I was in it, they did not get money when a song was performed on stage.
Right.
So they did. Because everyone was always like, oh, the best bands are like Phish and Grateful Dead and Dave, and it's not about CD sales. It's about the live show, and it's like. That works sometimes, but there's also people, basically the music industry's business model was such a mess that
it is
when it imploded.
Still is.
Yeah.
That's why the Dead toured for 30 years because they had to. They had to feed their children.
Same thing with Phish.
A lot of kids on tour. Yeah.
Yeah.
Phish. Don't get me started on Phish. I'm an old deadhead. I can't handle it. What can I say? I'm a young deadhead is what I meant to say. Well, this has been super helpful. We love Podpage for sure. We appreciate you coming on. We're all like music business, like PTSD/veterans. So we're all coming from the same place here. So it's cool to see. I mean, I appreciate you're not a serial entrepreneur. You're a serial problem solver. And it sounds like, you're making a really good progression. I think we can all relate to that. I think we're all kind of in that same space of being hyper focused on music, but really seeing this as a really cool industry to be involved in. It's definitely not going anywhere, and you're solving a lot of problems. I definitely recommend people to you guys to set up a pod page, and they can always just do like a redirect right from their website too. So there's other ways around it. For sure. Totally. But, I have one more question for you. If we wanted to, could we create 3 versions, right, of the Podcast Club pod page, and then Adam could ninja style his with like a Podcast Outfitters green banner, and Marcus's could look like his website and mine, or could you split one RSS feed up like that? Is that possible?
Yeah, when you can create as many pages for the same podcast as you want. So you could create 3 separate pages. They'd be 3 separate pages. And they, if you edited the episode information on one, it would not edit it on the other. They'd basically be 3 separate pages, but you could assign different domain names to each one, podcast. So yeah, all that's totally possible.
There you go, Adam.
There
you go. You could totally put that big ass green Podcast Outfitters banner on that Mickey Flicky, and you're in there. I mean, you're selling so much equipment that like you should have the equipment like on that page on your, you know what I mean? Like that's what I would do if I was you, Adam, because Brendan, we talk a lot about gear on this show. So if a new mic comes out, like that mic that Adam's using right now came out a couple episodes, we talked about it. And so we actually, and Marcus always has some new thing he bought that his wife's mad at him for, but he didn't need to buy in the first place. I'm working part-time for his wife to be mad on her behalf. But,
that's right.
We're always talking about gear. And so there is like direct, like, hey, and you can, by the way, buy all of this gear from Adam's family-owned music business store, Podcast Outfitters or Chuck Levin. So I think it would really That might be worth looking into because you got a developer, Adam. I got a developer. I don't know if you have a cheat sheet from the lady that did it on her website on like what needs to be changed or whatever, but that could be a really good modification to solve that problem.
Well, there's also it's funny. Everyone was asking. They were like, "We want e-commerce. We want e-commerce. We want e-commerce." And so I started starting to look into building e-commerce. And to me, e-commerce meant we want to sell things from our pod page. And when I started building and started asking customers a little bit more details, they're like, "Well, I have a book on Amazon and I have my T-shirts on Printful." Yeah. And I was like, "Oh, so do you not want to sell on pod page?" They're like, "Oh, I just want to be able to. I want those those stores on the page," and because we can't do that they don't have APIs, we built like basically a storefront. Which at the time I was like, this is fairly rudimentary, but it solved the problem for 90% of the people who asked for it. Which is essentially you can just add products to your pod page. There's a shop on pod page, a shop page, and you say like it's $15 for my T-shirt, and then we put a buy button, and all the buy button does is just take you to Printful for that one, right?
That's
so you
awesome.
can have like a gear section with the top gear, and then it just sends people over. I mean, some people use that as like they build. I've had people who are like, "Here's my podcasting gear," and it looks like a store, but it's just affiliate links that pop up and pop over to Amazon.
Brilliant! That's the third time I've said that this podcast. You're a
Perfect.
genius, Brendan.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff buried in there.
Yes,
done quite a great job in surfacing. But
and I'll end by saying that the main reason I chose Podpage, besides just hearing so many people loving it and using it and meeting you in person at Podcast Movement, I like the video thing is what sold it for me, because this is a video podcast, and that is something that a lot of other services don't offer out of the box. And so that was like, this is going to make my life easy. I will gladly pay for the upgrade for the pro service, and so I can just copy and paste the URL and have the playlist show automatically at the top of the website. So
Sweet.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, totally. I'm glad you're using it. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.